the material history of our civilization is quite fascinating. It is the materials we use for making our, all the artifacts we need in cities, and all of that has evolved quite dramatically over time. And we are in the period of our history where we are trying to get off one form of energy and transition to a different way to power our civilization. So we're changing 250 years of infrastructure, and it's, I think most people, human minds are scope and scale insensitive. So, when you start talking billions and millions, it doesn't mean anything anymore. Well, it's hard to imagine, but we do have to replace, billions of cars. We need to replace all of our power generation. We need to build energy storage if we use, renewable power and all of that. So it's a monumental task that has a significant material component. We're going to be needing a hell of a lot of new minerals and metals in order to build it. And so we're all very focused on getting off fossil fuels, but it's a little bit like playing a game of whack-a-mole. We are trying to whack down fossil fuels because of all of the impacts it has. But in order to do that, we need a hell of a lot more metal that comes with its own, environmental and social issues. What I'm focused on is trying to figure out how to meet at least some of this demand for new metal, for all the new infrastructure, with the least possible amount of damage to the planet and the people, and then make sure that from now onwards we are not using these metal atoms from circulation, that we, if we dig them up from wherever we dig them up, we don't end up, dumping them into landfills, but recover and recirculate.
And you call this a closed loop system, correct? Something like that?
Well, it's closed loop in a sense that it's, I actually love Professor Braungardt's construct here, or kind of a frame around it, which is, he's the author of From Cradle to Cradle. And, he frames things like metals as techno-nutrients that are circulating through our technosphere, not necessarily in a circular loop, because, you can recover the materials and use them for something else in our technosphere. But it is definitely trying to keep the techno-nutrients within the system, as opposed to lose them and have to inject new ones. So that's kind of largely his idea.
So how much more stuff would humans have to dig out of the ground in order to be able to make this transition away from fossil fuels?
Unfortunately, quite a bit more.
Does the Earth actually have enough stuff on it?
The Earth has enough stuff on it and in it for a long while. I think it's less, at least at this point in our time, it's less about availability. It's more about the economics and all the negative, or what until now we've been thinking of as negative externalities. I think we've learned in the last 50 years that there is no such thing as externality. They're all internalities to our biosphere. So it's really the environmental and social costs that is a bottleneck. Economics as well, but with economics, when you really need something and the price goes up, you will find a way to dig it out.
Do you share any of the optimism with the space industrialists who imagine shifting these externalities of industrialization to outer space?
Well, I've spent 5 years of my life on one of those schemes.
Scheme doesn't sound good.
Well, okay, let's find a better word. Big ideas or plans. I definitely, I did not shift I'll tell you what it was, but I didn't shift because I didn't believe it is not going to happen. It's just about the timelines and priorities. I do think eventually it will, it will make sense to produce, at least for all in-space use. It makes no freaking sense, to lift materials off of this planet. And it's cheaper. It creates less, again, environmental externalities to source a lot of the materials, whether it's fuel or structural materials for whatever we want to do off-world, from space. So that definitely makes sense. But it takes a long time. I mean, if you think about it, today we have 100 odd launches per year. Rocket launches. So it's not, I mean, that's like a tiny little straw in terms of our ability to expand. So it's going to take a long while, just transportation infrastructure, before you can access space at low cost. But the big idea that I was working on for a number of years is space-based solar power, and trying to build power generation capability instead of covering our lands and water with solar panels, for example. You could have you can collect solar power in geostationary orbit and then beam it down, and you have the advantage of being able to beam wherever necessary. Lots of problems with that as well, but that's one way of taking quite a lot of land use and a lot of externalities out of the biosphere of this planet, and moving into space.
I've heard you talk about the necessity to turn to science fiction to build ideas. And in your worldview, what have you found anything in science fiction that people haven't yet tried to apply? Have you found hope in these ideas that people have kind of come up with that haven't been turned into ideas that people have tried yet?
So much so, actually, that I, at some point in time, and quite a few years back now, I decided that I should disabuse myself of the notion that I can come up with anything visionary or new. I think our science fiction archives are absolutely filled with the most incredible ideas. We've imagined a lot. So I think we are, the supply of imagination is quite impressive. I mean, we just need to look back and read some of the things.
Who has the time, though? There's so many things going on
this planet now. And I actually think people have the time. I think we've created this notion that, people's attention it's all about attention economy and where our attention has shrunk and all of this. But at least I have seen myself gravitate towards long form everything and switch off all short form, because we're trying to microdose things that are just often don't lend themselves to that. So I now watch 3-hour podcasts. I no longer do tweets and Facebook. I mean, actually, yeah, I've just gone off a couple of years ago and just, don't do that anymore.
Good for
Feels
you.
a hell of a lot better.
Oh, you have a particularly long view of things in general, though. You've been working on these space projects, and now you're working on mining projects for Earth in order to help this transition. Do you think that that's something special about the way that you view the world, or just that you've managed to position yourself to be in a place where you can work on that? Like, are most people thinking like this?
How long-term are people capable of thinking?
In general, yeah.
Well, I've only ventured out into the cold because in a few years ago, when my business partner and I were trying to figure out what to do with had an existential crisis, wanted to figure out what to do with the rest of our lives and where, and I guess unlike some people in the younger generation, or the people who came after us, who were less animated, but by what am I passionate about, and it was more, the driving thought was what needs doing, So we ended up trying to construct a picture for ourselves, like what are the existential risks faced by our species, what are the major growth opportunities, and then map out, what areas have a lot of coverage and what areas don't have a lot of coverage. And it wasn't particularly surprising, but anything longer term didn't have a lot of takers, and everything short term and more optimization focused had quite a lot of attention and resources allocated. So we decided that, we would need to focus on things where there's not a lot of coverage. So, there's nothing special about us other than, just trying to fill in the gaps that we saw. That's all.